I just wanted to introduce, oh, okay, start recording. I wanted to introduce Dave Dodgson, who's a teacher and program coordinator and freelance trainer based in Gavin. He's worked extensively in Turkey with children and adults in general English, ESP, and EAP. And he also believes that personalizing language learning is key to success and has a strong interest in using authentic input for learners of all levels. So Dave, welcome. We're looking forward to it. And the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So I lost your sound a little bit towards the end, but I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Can you just give me a yes or a smiley or something to let me know you can hear me clearly? Okay. Okay, that's good. So yeah, welcome to this talk, and I hope you've been enjoying the talks over the last 2 days, and you've been getting some useful ideas and some inspiration to take back into your classrooms, whether that's on Monday morning or come September with a new academic year starting in many parts of the world. So I'm here at the moment in Prague. This is not my usual home, but I just come here for a few weeks. I'm actually taking the Trinity Diploma course at the moment. So I've been here to do my practical teaching assessment, and I have an exam coming up next week, funnily enough, seeing as our topic is assessment today. But I'll be getting on to some of my thoughts about the exam and how I relate them to what my students have to do a little bit later. So yeah, I'm going to be talking a little bit about assessment and particularly testing, and how quite often with testing, you know, we kind of end up in this kind of quite narrowly defined field where everything is set up by the test. But I'm going to explore some ways, some things I've done over the last few years to kind of try and open up the way I approach tests a bit, to make them a bit more meaningful for my learners, and something that happens as part of the language process rather than something which happens separately from the language learning process. So, and hopefully we'll get some ideas from you as well about how you approach preparing your students for these kind of pen and paper tests. But first, I'll throw the question open to you. I'm sure over the last couple of days you've picked up lots of ideas about this. But I'd like to gather your thoughts first. What do you associate with this word assessment? You can just type your answers in the chat box. Okay, yes, the word stress comes up straight away. Okay, test. Yeah, so often that's seen as synonymous with assessment, sometimes test and assessment. So scaffolded steps. And then, yeah, we've got the different kinds of assessment, of course, assessment for learning, assessment of learning. Measurements, yes, quantifying that learning in some way, putting a number or a grade on it, that's something we associate with assessment for sure. Progress, yes, showing how our learners have progressed from the start of the course to the end, or from the beginning of the academic year to later. Fun, okay, that Tyson saying that, or Catherine. Well, yeah, of course, everyone has different approach and different opinion. And outcomes, of course, that's an important thing. What happens after the test? What does the test show us, and where do we go from there? Okay, well, maybe if we change that question a little bit, if you think about your students and the other stakeholders, like your school administration, or maybe higher level, like local education authorities, those kind of stakeholders, what do you think they associate with assessment? Okay, yes, we got someone there straight on the money. Yeah, there is that idea of certain companies promoting certain tests, seeing it as a bit of a cash cow maybe. So yeah, the students are thinking about grades and points. I think also students often associate those grades or points or that certificate, they associate that with some kind of affirmation, like, this is it, I've succeeded, or oh no, I've failed. even sometimes we get students who have done quite well in our opinions, but they still act like they've failed maybe. If you've ever taught young learners, this is something that used to happen to me in Turkey a lot. I would give out test results and I'd tell one student, well done, you got 98%, and they'd have a little fist pump. And then I tell the next student, well done, you got 97, and then they'd slam their head on the table in despair. My friend got more than I did. So yeah, sometimes I think there can be a bit of a gap, a bit of a disconnect between what we as teachers think of assessment and what our students think. I mean, I'm sure I wasn't able to attend any of the talks yesterday. I'll be catching them on the recording, but looking at the titles and the blurbs and listening to little bits and bobs today, just talking about alternative ways to approach assessment, and game-based assessment was on earlier today, and self and peer assessment and all these kind of things. And these are all things we value as teachers, I think, because they can show us different things, but that doesn't always translate into what our students value. Quite often the students are quite focused on that end of course or end of term, end of semester exam, and that's where they often can place a value, which I think is a shame, and that's something also I'll be getting to in this talk. And I think in terms of beyond the students, those other stakeholders are school administrations and education authorities and examining bodies, there are other kind of assessment realities we have to think about. Quite often we talk about these alternative approaches to assessment and are promoting self-assessment with things like the European language portfolio, promoting peer assessment in class, having project-based assessment, and different kinds of tasks that we give students and assess them on. But I think the reality is that quite often testing is what outweighs it all. If you see the third question down, how are different assessment components weighted? In one of the schools I worked in Turkey, they had internal exams. So these were assigned by the English department, and there would be two or three per semester, depending on the year group. And that was what made up, I guess, 2/3 or 3/4 of their end of semester grade, and the other 25% would be coming from what was called a classroom grade, based on the teacher's assessment of their performance in class. Now, I pushed for a long time to get project work included in that assessment, because that was something my students clearly enjoyed doing. It was producing quite interesting results and really showing not only their level of language, but their ability to manipulate and use the language and pull different aspects of different things they learned about English together and apply them. So I pushed and I pushed to get projects officially recognized on the assessment. I eventually succeeded. We were told there would be one assessed project per semester that would be factored into their final grade. The only thing was that project was given a weighting of 5% of their overall grade. So ultimately, it didn't really mean much. So again, the test was dominant. The test was accounting for about 75–80% of their overall grade. And this is often what people expect. It's what students expect. It's what parents expect if we're teaching young learners. And it's what our school administrators want to have. They want to be able to show the outside world that this is how our students are performing. And then one problem I ran into during my time in Turkey is when I started at one school, we had these internal assessments. Then we decided to add in a language portfolio following the ideas of the Common European Framework and including self-assessment and so on. So that was fine. And then I succeeded in having the project-based assessment added. And then they decided to adopt these Cambridge Young Learner exams, starters, movers, flyers, and then CAT, PAT, FCE for the older students. The problem I found, though, was that all of these different levels of assessments, they just piled up on top of each other. Nothing, I mean, for me, bringing in the external assessment was fine, but that should have replaced the internal assessment. Or maybe if we're doing the external assessment towards the end of the academic year, maybe we should only have our internal assessment earlier in the academic year. But that just didn't happen. This stuff just piled up. So you end up with some students who are quite young, only 10 years old, and they would have 3 English exams per semester, plus assessed projects, plus a portfolio to prepare, plus an external exam to get ready for, and it was too much, I think. The problem I see is that sometimes testing kind of dominates assessment, and that's something that's difficult to change. I think it's just something that's very much entrenched, and it's something I think very difficult to change. So that's something that bothers me a bit about assessment. So I mean, I personally don't enjoy giving assessments to my students, and as I found doing this Trinity course, I don't exactly enjoy doing them either. But I think it's something we kind of have to accept, that somebody somewhere is always going to demand that there is a kind of sit-down exam, a pen and paper test, which forms a quite significant part of students' assessment. Now, there are people who favour assessment, this kind of testing, and there are various arguments I hear. I was in attendance at Jeremy Harmer's talk at IATEPL this year, and I believe he touched on the same points yesterday, and these kind of examples come up. They say, well, what about a surgeon? If you go to see a surgeon, don't you want to know that that surgeon is fully qualified and has passed all their tests and has been thoroughly tested and really shown their worth that way before they're let in an operating room? But when I think about that, something about that doesn't quite sit right with me. And the thing is, I think that when I go to see a doctor, if I have a consultation or something like that, I kind of take it as a given that this doctor is qualified. If I'm sitting in his office in quite a large hospital in the middle of a major European city, I'm going to assume that that doctor is qualified and has passed his exams. What will help me feel more comfortable about being with that particular doctor is what experience does he have? That's a question I would have. How many times has he done this kind of thing before? What experience does he have? How long has he been doing it? Is he going to do this himself, or is he going to have his junior assistant do it while he talks him through it? And also, I'll be looking for little things as I'm talking to him, like any little clues I can get about, is this man or this woman competent? Does this person know what they're talking about? Do they give me confidence in them? And these are things that I don't think a test can really assess. You know, experience comes usually after the testing phase. Then you are allowed to go out there and apply your knowledge in the real world, and that's where the experience comes from. And those other factors are things that can't always be tested. The other argument in favor of testing is that testing promotes practice. So if people have different kinds of exams, practical exams for sports or activities they participate in, they will practice. The exam will motivate people to get everything right and to learn things. Okay, to an extent that's true, I think, but also we have to think about what are people learning in preparation for the test. Quite often, they're just focusing very narrowly on what they expect is going to be on the test. I mentioned I'm in Prague for the Trinity Diploma course. I've completed the practical parts of it now, and next week I have a sit-down exam, a 3-hour exam, and I've been preparing for it. Of course, I've been reading lots of articles. I've been brushing up on different aspects of grammar that are going to come up in the language awareness section. I've been reading articles about teacher development and setting up training programs for teachers, because that's one essay section of the exam. And then the other essay section of the exam is about, you know, classroom practice and ways you can approach teaching different groups of learners. So I've been reading up all my articles on methodology and so on. And to be honest, I absolutely hated it. It's almost put me off. You know, I just trying to read through and think about not so much what I am going to say, but what can I say and how can I say it in a way that the examiner is going to reward with good marks. So I'm not sure that the practice that comes in terms when we're preparing for an exam is always the best practice. And then, of course, there's the other problem that the things you practice for an exam often go out of the window in one ear and out the other when it comes to the post-exam phase. So we'll see how the exam goes next week. It's not one I'm particularly looking forward to, especially as we have to reference authors. We have to reference people who've written methodology books and articles about various aspects of ELT, but without access to those books or articles. So, yes, referencing by memory, it seems a little bit extreme. But, yeah, these are the demands of the test, so this is what I have to do, and that's part of the reason why I haven't been enjoying my preparation for this particular exam so much. But it's worth being in these positions just to put ourselves in that student perspective, and then that makes me wonder, well, do my students ever, I'm sure they do they ever sit while they're studying and question the validity of the test they're going to do? Or do they just accept that they're going to do a test because that's what always happens? So, in terms of my views of assessment, there's a couple of critical moments, defining moments that I would like to share with you, because earlier in my career, when I was teaching a course and we had an exit exam at the end of the course, I never really questioned that. I just thought, well, of course we do. It seems logical. We teach for however many hours, and then there's a test at the end just to check the students have been paying attention. But I had a few moments that started to change my ideas about this, mainly when I started working with younger children in Turkey. And there the stress of an exam is a lot more apparent, I find. And yeah, I had many students who were very good in class. They were enthusiastic. They wanted to participate. They wanted to learn. They were interested in the topics we looked at. They had lots of their own things to say. But then they come to an exam, and suddenly, how young? Well, the youngest ones I worked with who were tested were 8, and then I worked with students from age 8 up to about 15, and all of them were tested at least twice a semester internally, and then there'd be external exams as well. And just this whole idea that we have to have a test, and I started to think, well, why? Because one particular student, I did write a blog post about this, so I'm just going to share a link to that in the chat box, so you can read on this in more detail later if you wish. This one particular student who was very, very good, a student I was always impressed with, but after one particular listening test, she got quite a low score. The listening, I guess, was above their level. It wasn't selected by me. And after that, her motivation completely disappeared. She wasn't that interested or engaged in the lessons anymore, and it took a long time to kind of coax her back into her old self. And it was the test that was the critical point there. And the other kind of critical moment I had was when we started to do this Cambridge standardized tests. Now, it's the standardization argument is the argument that I don't really have a good answer for at the moment. I'll think about it some more, but I know tests don't really test the right kind of things, in my opinion. They put too much stress on the learner and too much emphasis on discrete items of language that are maybe not going to be relevant in the future. But yeah, the standardization argument is a difficult one to argue with. The fact that a 12-year-old student can take this flyers test in Turkey, and another one can take it in Spain, and another one can take it in Brazil, another one can take it in Japan, and then we can compare where they are. That's a difficult thing to argue against. So when we first adopted these Cambridge exams, I thought, well, okay, maybe this is a good thing, if they're going to replace our internal exams, which unfortunately they didn't. But I soon became disenchanted with these exams just because of the amount of other stuff that came with it. So we had the exam, but then we got pushed upon us an exam preparation book, and we had to redesign our course, which was supposed to be about developing productive skills. It was mainly a speaking and writing course, but we had to redesign it to incorporate exam practice, so the speaking and writing kind of got pushed aside and the exam practice started to dominate. And we had a thick book to prepare for it, and we were encouraged to use photocopies of past papers to prepare the students closer to the exam time. And it just seemed to me that a lot of our lesson time was being taken up with preparing for this exam, which I didn't see as particularly useful. It was cutting out their time to put the language to use in communicative activities. It was cutting out their time to speak. It was cutting out their time to learn, basically. But it was around this time that I started to get interested in this idea of teaching unplugged and teaching dogme without being dictated by a course book, without everything being dictated by a course book. So I started to develop a series of lessons where I would get students to prepare for these exams with no preparation material. The preparation material we had would be stuff they created themselves. I'm just going to share another link with you, kind of recapping one of those lessons. And what I found was that the students were much more engaged, and we managed to prepare for the exam whilst also maintaining a meaningful learning process. And that's something, and that was the main thing that stayed with me since that time, is sometimes teachers can complain, and testing is maybe one of the things we complain about. But I've always felt a frustration in professional development with when we end up complaining about the things we can't change. I think it's much better to identify or to accept what we can't change and then focus on what we can change. So, in the case of these young learners I was working with in Turkey, I had no chance to change the exam. I'm not involved in that process working at Cambridge Assessment Headquarters, so there's no chance to change the exam. What I did have a chance to do was change the preparation process and make sure that preparation process was something more productive than just mindlessly going through test section after test section after test section. Also with the internal exams, I did not set or write the internal exams, but I did have the chance to talk to the people who did and engage them in conversation and to get them thinking about, well, why do we test what we test and why do we test it in this way? Are there any alternatives? And things like that. So I did later in that job, in my last couple of years in that job, get the chance to set my own tests, which also gave me a chance to take a different approach. So those are some of the things I'm going to talk about now. I do have another link to share here. Sorry for bombarding you with these. This is the last link of my own that I'm going to share today. But this is just a post about how I kind of reworked the tests when I was given the chance to do it. So the kind of things I did, I just summarized them here. As I said, with the Yes, ELT-Pix is a very good resource for both for these presentations and for the blog posts. But yeah, for the Cambridge exams, one thing I started to work on was these student-generated activities. So you have lots of activities with pictures, for example, in these young learner exams. So I would get my students to create their own pictures, and then, for example, there was one section with true-false sentences to go with a picture. So I'd get them to write their own, and then swap them with another group who would try to answer them. So then we would, then we're not only practicing for the exam, but I'm giving them the chance to do something productive that they are producing these sentences to. And I think it's also useful for them to kind of get into the exam from that perspective of how are the questions written. It gives them a much clearer idea of what is being tested and what is being looked for. Another thing we had was there are a lot of stories in those exams, short stories that they have to answer questions on. So I'd get them to write their own short stories. We would do some error correction activities and look for, give them feedback so they could revise and draft and a nice short story paragraph, and then they would create their own exam style activities, so multiple choice questions, or removing certain key content words and making their own closed test. And then testing their friends in the class. Sometimes even I'd take a student, a particularly good example, and say, okay, I'm going to take this and use it in the other classes. And that was an extra motivation for them, that they would then, be creating these review activities to be used in another class. It's all about making sure that the exam prep is not just a case of, here you go, here's a copy of the reading paper, let's go through it. So it's something much more productive. Then, as I said, I got the chance to set my own internal tests for my own lessons. So then I thought, well, why not take this a step further? If I'm getting the students to create all these lovely practice questions, why not give them the chance to actually create some questions that end up on the test as well? So vocabulary section of the test was something which was required, so that's what I chose. I had my students list the key vocabulary that they'd learned over the past few weeks, and I had them come up with their own definitions and then create their own questions. We had a section, for example, matching a word with a definition. We had a section of a gap-fill sentence and then choose the right word. And I had them create their own, and we revised them, we made them better. And then I collected them in. I eliminated the ones that were too easy or too difficult. And then I produced a bank from my different classes of about 30 vocabulary questions. I gave those questions to all the classes as revision material, and then I told them that 10 of those questions were going to appear in the test. So I think that was something that motivated the students a lot and helped them feel like they were ready for this test more, because they had contributed to it in some way. Also, there was a reading component to my course in that school in Turkey, and traditionally when they were tested on the books they'd read, graded readers and so on, they had to answer the questions from memory, which always, we talked a little bit about this with referencing from memory with the Trinity test I'm going to do. It just doesn't make sense to me. Why test them on a book if you're not going to let them look at the book? If you're only going to ask them factual questions, maybe, but if you want to get a bit deeper and if you want to get into some more critical thinking questions and asking for their opinions on what they've read, it makes sense to have the book. So that's something to think about, rather than just saying, no, of course they can't look at the book. It will make it too easy. You've got to think about what we're testing and why we're testing it. And the other thing I did with those young learners was this idea of 3 jokers, because I found quite often with students, they easily crumble in an exam situation. They answer questions 1 and 2 fine, question 3 is a bit difficult, and then they freeze and they kind of can't get past it. So I would give my students the right to have 3 jokers. It was easy because I administered the test as well, but I would give them the chance to, the 3 jokers were that they could ask me for the answer to 1 question. They could ask me for the meaning of 1 word in the test paper, and they could ask me to a yes or no question of, is this answer correct? So those 3 jokers I had in place just because I'd seen so many times students clam up and get stuck on that first question they found difficult. So then that would give them the chance to go past it. In terms of keeping track of them, well, I would have a little checklist just to make sure. I'd have my mark sheet, and I'd just put a little check next to their name if they'd ask me. The other thing, in my current school, I came into this school as it was just being set up, and I was asked to set up the entire curriculum. This is for adult learners, including assessment. So I brought in this idea of a repeated assessment where the learners are given a productive task in the first week, either a speaking task or a written task or a combination of the 2. And then they're given the same task 6 weeks later, because our courses have quite a quick turnaround. So then that gives them an idea of what's going to come up at the end of the course. And also, if we're talking about measuring progress, I think that's a great way to measure progress, to compare 2 similar similar activities from the beginning and the end of the course and see where the progression is. Because, you know, there's always that problem with assessment. A student gets 80, but is that good for them or is it not good for them? If their average before that test is 95, it's not so good. If their usual average is 60, it's very good. So I like the idea of an assessment the way you can make a direct comparison and show some progression. Now those are things I have tried. There are some other ideas that I would like to try, but I maybe haven't had the courage or the opportunity to try them yet. So I'll share some of those with you now, and this is where I stop self-promoting and start sharing other people's links. So one of the first ideas is this idea of collaboration and or cheating. Well, collaboration, the idea there comes from somebody involved in this weekend, the TOBELTA president, Mr. James Taylor, and I've shared a link to his blog there. A hypothetical post he created about how he would test, which kind of inspired some of the things I just told you about with allowing students to write their own questions and so on. And he has some interesting ideas there about, well, why does a test have to be an individual thing? Why does one student sit down with one paper and answer the questions? Why not allow some collaboration? Not copying, but collaboration, getting them to work together to produce an answer. I mean, it's just a different way of approaching things and a different way of thinking about things. In terms of this idea of allowing cheating, this came to me through one of yesterday's plenary speakers in partnership with Luke Meddings, in partnership with Lindsay Clanfield. They have an ebook 52, which I've shared the link to there. And they have an idea in there about why not let students cheat before an exam. There is a logic behind it. They say if we give students the chance to make a set of notes on a piece of A5 paper, for example, and they are allowed to make those notes and they're allowed to bring them into the test. Now, that might sound like something strange to do, so you're making it too easy for them, but they make the point that if the idea of the test is to get the students doing the work and going back to that protest argument of getting people to practice, so this is a very good way to make sure that they practice rather than just stressing about it or not bothering because they think they're not going to do well, or studying for hours and stressing over things that never come up. Why not get them more focused and then they actually study and work hard and maybe learn something more. And then other ideas, I mean, this is something I've thought about. Well, tests, we always end up with this mental image of people sat down in rows in the classroom. So why not move outside the usual testing space? Why maybe students would relax more if the weather's good and we let them take the test outside. Maybe they would relax more if they could take the test in a different part of the school, somewhere with a better ambience, for example. And the other thing, this is an idea that's come to me towards the end of the last academic year, actually, while I was puzzling over that classic dilemma of a student has answered a question. Now, their answer is possible. It's not the answer you were aiming for, but then there's that question of, does the student actually know this kind of alternative, more advanced level answer, or have they just got lucky and written something which could make sense in a specific context? And I thought, well, in that case, why not get the student involved? Why not speak to the student the next day and say, well, you put this answer here, so why did you choose this answer? And what were you thinking? Like, what do you believe this means? And then, depending on their response, we award them the mark or not, or we give them a partial mark, and so on. I just think it's important to find ways to get the students more involved. And if they feel more involved in the learning process and the testing process, they're more likely to benefit from it, I feel. And the other ideas I've shared, I mean, it's just always about asking why. We shouldn't just accept things are this way because they've always been this way. We should think about why, and we should think about alternatives. So what I would hope people will do after attending this session is just think about how students are assessed in your context, and think about why they're assessed that way, and think about, is there any different way, any better way to change the process? What are the things you can change? Okay, if we forget about the things you can't change, like the content of the test itself, what are the things you can change, like maybe preparing for the test? If it's an internal assessment, maybe you can speak to the people in charge of it. Maybe you can get a conversation going and just think, what is this the best way to assess our students, and what are our alternatives? And if you do start that kind of conversation, I would always say go into that conversation with some alternatives ready to suggest. So, you're not just going there and sounding like someone who's being a bit awkward, but you're going there with ideas and with potential solutions and with things that can be done to make the process better for our students and part of the learning process rather than apart from the learning process. So that's about all I have to say. If you have any ideas, any alternative ways you've approached assessment that I haven't talked about, please share those. Or any questions that I missed, I'll be happy to answer them now in the final 10 minutes that we have.
Hey, Dave. Maybe you can address the problem area that I mentioned. It was with regards to collaborative testing, having students do things collaboratively. Do you see that in the chat box?
Yeah. Like I said, this isn't something I've actually tried myself. So I think it is something you'd obviously have to think about carefully. You'd have to have some kind of system in place for this, because of course, this is the problem we get in things like a project tasking class, that it's quite easy for one student to dominate or the other student to let them dominate or encourage them to dominate. That's something I think it's always good to have some kind of preparation. So if you are going to have something like that in an assessment situation, is to also do it in a non-assessment situation and kind of go through that process of learner training and have quite a clear rubric, for example, showing them what you're looking for. And I would say in that rubric for this kind of situation, there would have to be a quite significant portion of marks given for collaboration and teamwork. And I'd kind of talk the students through the process of how that's going to happen in a non-test situation. So then when it comes up to doing some kind of assessed project or assessed collaborative work within test conditions or a certain time limit, that they're aware of that and they know that it's something you're paying particular attention to.
Yeah, maybe too the students could evaluate each other then in terms of participation. Yeah,
that's something to get their feedback on it. Also, that's something I didn't really mention here, but I've heard some students talk about the idea of allowing the students through self and or peer assessment to directly award a certain percentage of their own grade. So maybe you could tell them, well, 10 marks here, for example, are going to be decided by you, by your perception of how well your group worked and what kind of contribution everybody made. Okay, so I'm just looking through some other comments. Let's see. Jen mentioned thinking about using the jokers. Yeah, I think that's a good one, especially for internal assessment. Obviously, you may be in breach of rules if you try it in an external assessment, but I do think that's something that helps students kind of get over some of that initial stress, and ultimately, we're only helping them gain 1 or 2 extra marks, I think. Yeah, and I see a comment here too about allowing some element of cheating in ungraded assessments. So yes, helps the students help each other and point out any errors they might be having, because of course there's always the possibility that as they prepare that cheat sheet, they actually put something incorrect on it. They actually put something incorrect on it, and then that's something you can address and draw their attention to, so they don't make the same mistake when it comes to the real thing.
I'm just going to pipe in here. Hi, everyone. Just to see if anyone has any final questions before we wrap up. I just want to, Dave, I didn't cut you off, I hope. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, it's fine. Just waiting for any other comments or questions.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for this informative session. I think we all learned quite a bit about assessment and alternative approaches. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.